All right. Good evening. It's Ken at Tortoise Capital, nightly podcast for Sunday, May 31st, 2020. Watching our cities burn. Those of you of a certain age that grew up in the 60s, who would have thought this would be happening again? Haven't learned anything in 60 years. It just seems to me that if you start with the position that people are half a chromosome away from chimpanzees and that the natural state of nature is the jungle, you ask the questions, why is there ever any civilization at all? And what are the things that allow for the fragile creation of that anomaly? Because the state of nature is poor jungle savagery. So you're not surprised when you see that kind of behavior in a mammalian species. And when I talk with a lot of my high school players and my college players, they're just amazed at the things that they see. It's because they have this expectation that people are good and civilization and prosperity is normal. And so they see differences from that as the anomaly and something to be explained and you wonder about. And it really comes down to a view of human nature in many ways. So we'll see how this all works out. Boy. Well, I commend to you the TED Talk from 2013 by Dr. Kelly McGonigal, a health psychologist and lecturer from Stanford, from 2013 entitled Stress. Like all TED Talks, it's about 18 minutes long. And so the highlights for me, got the ladies upstairs watching this right now, in fact. So she defines stress as something that matters. It's the recognition in your body and mind that something that matters is at risk. And so there's a physiological response to that. And she relates the story that for 15 years, she'd been teaching people that stress was really harmful to your health and something to be avoided and managed. And she came across some studies that suggested that may not be the full story. And so her bottom line is that your reaction to feelings of stress makes all the difference. And so she cited a number of studies that said, well, the most impressive one was a study of 30,000 people over a 10-year period, and they asked them two questions. Number one, do you believe stress is a negative impact on your life, or do you believe stress represents a opportunity to rise to the challenge? And then they asked him if you were experiencing a lot of stress in your life relatively at this time. And then they waited 10 years, and then they reviewed public death records, and they tracked it back to positions in there. And what they found was that if you self-reported that you were experiencing a lot of stress in your life and that you believed stress had negative impacts on your health, those people had a 43% greater chance of dying than the population mean. And the people who had the lowest rate of deaths were those who believed that stress was a positive opportunity to rise to the occasion. They experienced less death than the people who reported low stress but believed it was negative. So this ends up getting reinforced in the scientific literature that she then has been studying for years since. And now she's changed her tune and said basically that there is a choice that you have about how to respond to the stressors in your life. And one way to interpret the stress response is that your body is optimizing itself for the challenge that you can rise to. As an example, under stress, your pulse rate increases. In people who believe that stress is a negative, they tend to freeze and they experience vascular constriction, meaning that their blood vessels shrink, and this creates a harmful consequences on the cardiovascular system. But folks who believe that stress was a positive opportunity to rise to the challenge experienced an increase in pulse rate, but did not experience vascular constriction. So their blood vessels remained relaxed. And in those people, the increasing heartbeat, pushing much more blood around the body, was oxygenating their system and triggering some fight or flight syndrome and preparing their body to achieve. And that turned out to have very positive health implications over time. Another aspect of the stress response is the production of oxytocin, which is a stress hormone, in the same way that adrenaline is a stress hormone. Adrenaline is released to trigger much more efficient use of energy and to give you athletic performance ability. There's a consequence later on that when you release adrenaline, there is some short-term damage to cells that have to be repaired. And so the need for rest and recovery, consolidate and reorganize after an adrenaline challenge is necessary for the long-term health of the organization. One of the implications of chronic stress syndrome is that when your body's been optimized to respond to very few but really significant stress events, and the response is adrenaline, and it's followed by, if you survive, an opportunity to rest and recover in the protective confines of the tribe, well, then you have a body that responds in that way. When you live a modern lifestyle and what the Chinese would call a 20 tiger day, where all of the environmental triggers that come in to trigger stress are causing you to release adrenaline and having that run amok like electricity through your body without the ability to rest and recover, well, you get this accumulation of detrimental physiological effects over time, leading to hypertension and cardiovascular disease. So one of the things that McGonigal now teaches is how to get better at stress, not how to avoid it, but how to embrace it and then how to turn it into a positive. So one of the things about oxytocin, the stress hormone, is that it increases the effectiveness of your emotional connection to others in your tribe, that it facilitates and encourages and reinforces social interaction and allows us to draw strength from others, to give strength to others, and it reinforces the social bonds that make our species the social animals that we are, and the power of the family and the tribe is reinforced as a response to stress. It is a communitarian response to stress, and oxytocin is the hormonal mechanism to reinforce that. So the positive response to stress is something that you can choose and you can train and you can do. I would draw your attention to the HeartMath Institute, HeartMath, which talks about the freeze framer technique, which I've been using for about 30 years now, that talks about how to recognize the onset of physiological indicators of stress and gives you an opportunity to do something physiologically and mentally to put yourself in a state to process that new energy wave that comes in and maintain a regular heartbeat, and allows you to employ that energy driven by stress in a positive way. So there are physiological responses to stress that actually work. So the athletic performance of world-class athletes that involves visualizing, breathing, mental imagery, rehearsing, battle drill, teammates, um, whether you make the foul shot or miss the foul shot, they come over and slap hands because it's a recognition that you're in there in the moment, willing to take the shot regardless of the outcome. And so the positive reinforcement of guys in the tribe is what leads to the build up of emotional resilience and emotional strength, the ability to convert stress response into positive health outcomes. So in studies that explore this, McGonigal reports that the ability to manage and leverage the stress state results in positive health and attitude, positive performance, both mentally and physiologically, a strengthening of our social connections, and a reinforcing of our social networks. So, if we think about this in terms of like a process model, we might look at the importance of beliefs. Oh man. Let's see. Checking right now to see if I remembered to record this. Yes, thank goodness. So, the importance of the beliefs that you have on the choices you make with respect to stress and the long term positive consequences that you get. This is like accumulating R every day, the response to stress. And so, if we think about where those beliefs are, as I've drawn in this triangle, this layered triangle, that are external actions in the world that have results and consequences, which then reinforce beliefs, identity, and values. I sort of place those in the belief statements as being declarations of language, formally stated, embraced, adhered to, lived by, principles to guide us, messages to reinforce, written or heard or spoken or lived in a certain way to reinforce our behaviors, and that they derive from the next layer down of stated values and goals, the end states that we're trying to achieve, or the goals that we're trying to work towards, or the shape of that future vision that we're trying to create, by changing the things that don't look like that, and embracing and rewarding the things that do. So those beliefs are that connective gearbox that allows us to turn our actions into goal-oriented behaviors, supported by the beliefs about how the world works and who we are and how we fit and who the actors and agents in our ecosystem are, and what are the powers and structures that are in play, or the rules of the game that we believe in. And that those stated values and goals are connected on the emotional level, at the values level, to the deep roots of who we are, at our very center, the beyond words values that we feel. And then the identity is that when we put the words to that end state and what we stand for. And then the beliefs are that next layer of detail about operating, the operating system and how it works, and how that then guides the actions we decide to take as a result of the experiences we have, and how we create meaning out of the beliefs, identity, and values, which then triggers the actions that have consequences, results, which then go into reinforce this cycle of integrated, aligned action. Now, we at least want to be aligned in all these things. And now the importance of beliefs as the way to access those layers of identity and values at our core, and then also how they enable and shape and direct our actions in the world. Well, like any belief, any change in belief, you can run that through a series of experiments and check out the consequences, and you can do the cost benefit analysis if you need to decide what's the cost and benefit of trying the choice that says stress is actually reframed as a opportunity for me to rise to the challenge, that I'm going to embrace that and recognize that it is an energy source that's generated by the ecosystem, and by me being a member of that ecosystem. I want you to think back about 10 days ago when he talked about the remapping of the energy flows of trading from a before map into an after map, where we looked at the before map being a picture of an unfair tug of war up a hill, dragging a fat guy and a heavy weight while the ground is on fire underneath us, and all of the time and variables and carnivores are out there working against us as we try to pull this weight uphill. And there were a set of beliefs that we might have that would cause us to believe that that map was true, a true representation of the world. And then we did an exercise where we envisioned the aftermap, in which we saw trading simply as a job for you to do that was in line with the seasons and natural forces like the water cycle. And then all we have to do is be who we are in that cycle and position ourselves in a way to benefit from and contribute to the natural forces that are generating this endless cycle of opportunity and energy. And then we mapped out a series of beliefs that supported that view of the world as being true. And then when we went down to that next layer and saw the before beliefs and the after beliefs, we realized that we needed that transmission gearbox, that connective tissue that allowed us to go from before to after. And we identified not only a set of beliefs about how to do the transition, but that transitions are possible, and that we could identify forces for good that both pushed and pulled, things that pushed us out of the beforehand beliefs and things that pulled us towards the after beliefs, the ones that were more useful and helpful. And so having a set of beliefs about the transition, that change is possible and that it can occur, and that we can plan, resource, adapt, assess, and improvise and overcome and apply the principles of continuous improvement in whatever the topic might be. So in that case, we were talking about the energy map, and how can we build up our emotional resilience as a result of shifting the way we think about the energy cycle of trading. That I don't have to initiate all action, that I don't have to make things happen, that instead I can recognize, characterize, respond to, and position myself with respect to natural forces that allow me to relax and breathe and float and just do a little bit of nudging to steer to get on the right side of the current and the flow of water, and just be part of that cycle and actually be energized by it. And it doesn't have to be a net negative energy sink. It can be a reinforcing positive energy cycle simply by changing those beliefs. And then this technique in the green box gave us the ability to go from before through a transition period into the after in a very powerful way. So that same technique, in my view, can be applied towards understanding the stress response. The other guy that I really strongly encourage you to listen to on this subject, I think is Cal Poly, or maybe also Stanford, but Robert Sapolsky. Let me get his name on here. He has a 24 course lecture series. Each one is about 90 minutes. Dr. Robert Sapolsky. Look him up on YouTube. His course on stress and his speeches on stress and his the biological roots of behavior and psychology are just absolutely fascinating. It's a graduate course for free that I think it's Stanford puts on. But yeah, everything he does is amazing, and I would really strongly have you listen to that, because he draws the continuum between genetics and DNA all the way up the food chain in this cognitive scale to psychological beliefs and structures, and talks about nature versus nurture inside of that continuum. And he describes how the different fields of study begin where the last one ends, and that you have this continuum of explanations that each one starts as the assumptions or the start point of the next series of disciplines. And that when you're analyzing the biological basis of behaviors of individuals or groups, that the explanation doesn't reside in any single one of those, but actually can be seen through a multitude of these lenses, which gives us rich insight into what it means to be human, to have consciousness, to be a social animal, to live in a physical world, but which is also includes emotions and mentality and genetics and operant conditioning and culture and all that stuff in a sensible way. And that is such a powerful set of lessons that's like my favorite marching lessons, my marching music, because I listened to Sapolsky lecture on this. Absolutely fascinating stuff. So Sapolsky is a really good supplement to, and actually goes deeper, much deeper into the science than an 18-minute TED Talk can do. But I strongly recommend that to you. And listening to that course was one of the instrumental levers for my daughter to choose to go into psychiatry as opposed to just pure biology and biochemistry, because she's fascinated by the connection between biology and psychology and wants to do good for the people. So we've talked a lot about Sapolsky and now McGonigal. And so the important impact on us as traders, in my view, is the fact that we are deliberately entering an ecosystem into a game to play where stress is a central feature of every transaction in some form, and that we can make choices about that stress. We can learn to appreciate or understand what stress is doing to the humans in that system, and gives us the ability to detach from the inside of the fishbowl and to maintain that detached observer's perspective that gives us the ability to apply systems in a systematic and disciplined way that gives us an edge. So if one were to do then that cost-benefit analysis of how to embrace the beliefs that stress is your body optimizing for the challenge, and then reinforce that with some of the positive psychology materials that I'm developing for the positive psychology course for the LMS, but really working through a lot of the monkey mind and forming habits and checklist disciplines and continuous process improvement in the Kaizen, in the Gemba approach. All of these things are ways for us not to defeat stress, but to embrace it, understand it, leverage it, and apply it. And that cost-benefit analysis, I believe, will help you look through this lens to see each trade as an opportunity to create value for your portfolio and for your own emotional bank account. And it's a way to add value both to your portfolio equity curve and to your emotional bank account. And that by using the principles of process improvement, we don't have to be perfect at this. All we have to do is commit to a forward-seeking journey where we're just getting better and better each day. So I want to connect that to the next graphic on Joe's challenge, and we'll get into the review of trade frames here shortly. But I want to spend about 10 minutes on this. Good, Joe's here. So Joe's note to me last week about the trading challenge was, he said, if we just took that top 12 or so list of topics from the podcasts that week, in which I thought we were pretty good, he said, is it possible just to build an effective trading system right out of there? So I think he's sort of committed to doing that. And we were already, I believe, making steps in that direction as a result of how we focused his work immediately from the boot camps. How could we quickly get to a set of useful behaviors for the world with immediate payoff and survival value, and then build backwards towards the underlying deeper beliefs, but really concentrate on the effective, what I would call self-defense and combatives, survival skills, in order to just start earning as you learn. Learn to earn and earn while you learn, if we may say it that way. I think we should. So it's sort of inevitable when you're working with me that things become part of everything connects back to this lifelong journey of self-discovery, self-mastery, and relationship to the world, this sense-making approach that for me integrates everything I do. And one of the lenses that I look at in there is through that martial arts lens. So my big five are to be, when I'm dead, thought of as a good husband, father, student, teacher, and warrior through the eyes of the people that I care for. And they're the ones who are my judges. And so the father and the husband, clear. Student and teacher, I want to be a good teacher for my students. I want to be a good student in the eyes of my teachers. And I see that as a reciprocal, simultaneous relationship, that to be a good teacher is to be a student of the profession, and that to be a good student of the profession requires teaching in order to be able to learn from the presentational mode of learning and to be able to support the other members on the journey. So the student and teacher reciprocal relationship is that method of maximizing the sustainable rate of growth in a group learning setting. Well, the fifth element of that, father, husband, student, teacher, warrior, is warrior in the Eastern sense, the Dharma warrior, the one who lives a fully intentional life, which is all about that self-mastery. And the relationship to the world is defined there as I discover who I am and what I'm about, and I'm trying to live an intentional life. And then my relationship to the world as a Dharma warrior is one that is committed to the protecting of the weak against the forces of evil and to promote peace and prosperity in the world by any means necessary. So that sort of defines that relationship to the outer world and my purpose in that world. Well, it's a short step there from that to this martial arts view of the world, which can be seen exactly as a lifelong journey of self-discovery, self-mastery, and relationship to the world. And so if that is sort of a lifelong pursuit, it's much more about the holistic relationship to the world and self-discovery than it is for shorter term, narrower focus things like survival, sport, or living on the street. It's normal to see the martial arts, get compartmentalized into various disciplines. There are weapons arts and striking arts and grappling arts and mental arts and different styles. And then some subset of those disciplines are always focused, on things that worked in a survival sense. There was a certain relationship between the practical use of karate and jiu-jitsu and kung fu because of the survival benefit that it represented. But then when you combine the effectiveness of survival with some of these other elements, the more spiritual and mental and meaning making artistic elements, you end up growing out of survival into a discipline, and then more broadly into the martial arts, which incorporates a lot of the most common features found in all of the disciplines, some intentionally and some just simultaneously, and due to their very nature that there's sort of a broader spirit of Bushido or Budo that describes the martial disciplines in that Eastern sense of self-mastery. You can see that especially in Zen, is a pretty clear expression of that inner warrior's dharma struggle to master the impulses and to, live in accordance with the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Well, you then see a lot of the martial arts getting stylized and then structured into the world of sport with rules and competitions and certain things that are allowed and not allowed. And then the guys who say, yeah, well, that maybe works on the mat in a scored sport in the Olympics or something, but that doesn't work on the street, which is kind of all really about, hey, I'm a street fighter, and it's all about the survival and what really works. Well, there's a continuum of that discussion that is never ending and always fascinating if you find that interesting. But I think it's fair to say that what we're talking about, I think, in Joe's case, and what we've sort of, I don't know if we really even said it that way, but it really kind of worked out this way, that we wanted, bottom line, to be able to take care of the family and the kids and to achieve financial freedom in an honorable way. And so we've taken the approach, first, be rock solid on defense, in the same way that when you look at Army combatives and police combatives and the police application of jiu-jitsu principles about self-defense and controlling the person of interest, these are all about not the lifelong journey of self-discovery, mastery, and relationship to the world, but really have an immediacy that is very specifically mission-focused, that deals with a very clear set, an unambiguous set of conditions governing what's going on, that they tend to be very short-term focused because it's many cases just a matter of simple survival. That if you don't survive this round, there's no next round for you to continue this lifelong journey. It's over. And so there are very specific outcomes that are absolutely cut and dried about what works and what doesn't work, which can be rendered down into a series of tasks, conditions, and standards about how to train in an effective way in order to promote these kinds of outcomes. So effective self-defense and combatives, that sort of approach to life, produces these kinds of evaluation criteria. You want things that are directly in support of immediate survival first, foremost, and always. You want things that can happen quick with ruthless efficiency. There are simple triggers and simple responses. You want to be able to overtrain them safely to become instinctive so that you don't have to spend time and energy on cognitive processing and execution. You can simply react the way that you are trained. So now training safely and realistically now becomes important when you're thinking about how to overtrain. And you want to be able to jump right into it with no warm-up, prep, or warning, because that's how the world comes at you. And you want it to be applicable 24/7, rain or shine, day or night, any season. And that's, to me, part of the description of the journey of the walking man through the roundabout, is that we're trying to develop some bulletproof systems for trading in all the time frames that allow us to respond to these kinds of requirements, these kinds of drivers, and focus on things that give us these kinds of results. And so I think the set of topics that came out of that set of discussions over the last couple of weeks, and really, I would personally say through the entire hybrid course, has really been focused on, first, how to survive the pandemic ecosystem. First, you got to survive. Then you can worry about bringing home the gold. First, do no harm. Don't get eaten by tigers and sharks. And so Joe offered a set of a summary of those lessons that we've been hammering out. The opening range 5, the opening range 60, the series of frog box, hybrid frog box, and minimum manageable risk box, and what they represent, about how and when to enter with a degree of measurable insurance, the idea of yesterday's VWAP versus today's VWAP and how to use those as anchors for reasonable moves based on where price is today. And then turns in the RL10. We saw the importance just yesterday and the day before about the baby dragon as a way to even more clearly see the importance of what's going on when the slope of the RL10 changes from negative to positive or positive to negative. You just put in a marker for a potential swing trade change, in that time frame. And then the use of the PSAR, Dragon, and MACD, the seasons of the MACD, in order to really fine tune the framework that comes from the regression lines and the VWAPs and the use of the signal and noise boxes, and then the use of that opening range 5-minute and 60-minute to get some estimates of the size potential of the daily move. So all of those things in Joe's challenge were stated as, hey, I wonder if you could just turn those things into an effective system. And I think that's a good challenge. And then what I would say to round out this view of the battle circle is I would say, hey, Joe, what you've done is identified a set of very specific techniques. And then the other elements that go into the mix of what gets tested in here is the importance of that market and sector analysis to create the context in which your target is operating. Don't lose sight of the market and sector framework. Don't neglect the inner work of preparing yourself for battle. These are the weapons and the tools. Remember, it's you using those in the context of time and place. And then the things that you're working on, the targets set that you're using to apply these techniques inside the markets and sectors that they live in, using yourself as instrument, the intersection of those four angles plus this set of targets, that all is going on inside this battle circle, which produces the results that we're going to commit to continuous improvement and assessment to get better at. So there was some questions from the crew before about if I was going to pick a subset of symbols, how would I do that? I might think about it in these layers. I would start off first with the S&P. And then if I was going to add, I'd add the diamonds and the Russell, because those three, this one gives you the market, the S&P. Diamonds gives you 30 even more focused super mega large caps across many different sectors, which moves slower and more orderly and gives you a really nice conservative approach to trading the same trends that you see in the market. And then if I was going to add one, I'd probably add IWM, because now I have the aggressive side of the S&P. If the diamonds are the conservative side and the S&P's in the middle, then I would add IWM as the aggressive trader side. And then I might show treasuries as an alternate asset class that, although trades with the volatility of a stock, is quite often in opposition to the moves that you see in the equity. So that gives you a nice alternative that you can go long in. I would add, I think Japan for swing, it's not good on intraday, but Japan and then Euro-Asia, large caps, gives you two nice competing alternatives to SPY. So that gives you, in a nutshell, a world market model view of the world. Then if I was going to add, I would certainly add volatility next as a front runner to the way the S&P and indexes change. That is often the first thing that gives a hint that times are going to change. In the same way that I like treasuries as an alternative to equities, I also think the very narrowly focused USO gives us such a sharp insight into the fundamental commodity that drives modern civilization and which drives all global politics is the price of oil, and USO is a nice way to be able to express that. You can do more with that by seeing it in comparison on the next level with XLE, the energy sector, but just adding volatility and oil to that top row was pretty good. And then I just believe because of Frog Championship status, Mexico and Brazil give you the same kind of advantages for trading that the S&P does, but with the extra advantages of even smoother and cleaner and much wider moves. And that because they're often out of sync with the S&P, you always have something now going its own way and in its own life cycle. So the market might be flat, but Mexico and Brazil could be moving. And so because they trade so beautifully intraday as well as on swing trades, they're frog champions. That's a nice set of things to add. Then I would add, of all the sector spiders, I like adding those 5 to get a sufficiently diverse view of important components of the S&P without necessarily mastering all 10, but basic materials, energy, finance, technology, and healthcare. One of those 5 is moving very strong, better than the market, and one will be moving much worse than the market on any given day. So you can begin to differentiate the subsets of the market in that way. That leads you to the logic chain. And then you can further break down if you had to. So if you were going to go with XLB as an example, in the same way that I add Home Depot, Devon Energy, well, actually, Devon Energy is really part of XLE, I suppose, but I think of it as a frog champion. But Home Depot, Devon Energy, U.S. Steel, Cliff Natural Resources, Alcoa. I might add Nucor Steel in there as well. But that gives you a set of company-sized derivatives to be able to drill down from market to sector to company. And so just from that set of, what is that, 6, 10, 15, so 20 symbols, I believe gives you a view of the world that something is moving all the time, and that you'll have something in every one of the 4 seasons at any given time if you're measuring those. Now you can certainly expand that, and you can always add to it. But one of the things that you want to do then, Joe, when you're taking a look at, can I make a trading system out of that set of technical rules, I would say, yeah, but you also have to give just as much thought to the target set, so that you always have something to work on. You know, if I'm a woodworker, what kind of woods do I want to work in? And then the market and sector relationships are important here, and that's really connected to this thing on the other side of the circle. Like what you see there are markets and sectors and only just a few targets. So if you get the market right, like the S&P and the volatility right, then you're half the way or 3/4 of the way to successfully navigating this trade in here. And then you got to get that self-mastery of your own self in the Gemba, and the way you approach it with training and battle drill and no mind and emotional resilience and respect for the game and the way you prepare. All of those things taken together create that set of conditions that produce the results when you're done with the fight. And then if you just use those results and then make sense of them in a continuous way, the walking man on that journey, and then using the roundabouts to reset, recover, recharge, relax, repurpose, react to stress, respond to stress. For those of you that have taken the peak performance course, I'm trying to remember, I think Van has in that one the concept of respondability, in which you're trying to create the emotional and intellectual resources so that no matter what the ecosystem throws at you, you have the capability to take affirmative action, that you're not simply a knee-jerk response to whatever the world decides to trigger next, that you can actually make choices on how to respond to stress and respond to opportunities. And then that relaxed, disinterested view of the ecosystem allows you to see opportunities that maybe a stress-centric or a negatively stressed view of the world might not allow you to see. So in terms of understanding Joe's trading challenge, that's the frame of reference that I would overlay that on, Joe, so we can take a look at that as we go. But I believe you're well on the way of doing that. Like we've been talking recently this month about um, how to add to your target set. And now that you've started to do that, I think your results are coming along even better. And now this gives you an appreciation for why it was important to restrict to just a handful of symbols at first in order to begin to master these elements by reducing the number of external variables. Don't try to watch too many things. Just look at enough things that give you something to work on each day and refine your craft. And then you can always add new raw materials and new opportunities later once you become bulletproof on your execution of these techniques. So that's how I see what we're doing, Joe, is that we're really taking a look at self-defense and combatives. And my orientation is not for sport. I'm talking about street survival by finding the things that are effective in this kind of environment so that we can achieve these kinds of effects and take these kinds of actions with our tools as we enter the battle circle. Okay? So that's what I wanted to say about that. I promise in the future I'm going to do the lessons after. I keep saying that, but it just seems like I got to say those things in order to get to the tactical pieces. So that's just kind of, I guess that's just how my brain's wired. I will try to shift that around in the future. Let me find the charts of interest. I would remind you that starting tomorrow is the new link for all of the June nightly podcast. I posted that on Patreon for you, and if you register on that once, it'll pre-register you for all of the June podcasts. So just to let you know that the link changes. Okay. So let's just get right into it. These are the charts that the gang put together in the chat room. So I just want to kind of review and respect that work that you guys have done in here. So this one is eBay, and I'm just going to chew you out, Eugene. How long have you been watching eBay and not telling us just how amazing it is? I mean, really, dude. Why are you keeping a good news story to yourself like that? You just don't want us to succeed? I mean, what's going on here? So what we've got here clearly is something that has not only survived contact with the sell-off here in March and April, but made the turn at the same time everything else made the turn, had a supported spring crossing in here, and leg one took it right back up to the pre-sell-off conditions. That's just leg one. And if you call this leg two, and now we've started leg three at 45, this thing has gone from 26 to 45, almost an 80% return in an unbroken chain of PSAR dots. So I just got to say, on the basis of that, Eugene, you got to figure it out sooner for us. Kind of relying on you to make it easy and obvious. So he apologized and said he just found it last night by scanning the Dow and the NASDAQ 100 sorted by ATR. What was the sort on this one? A reduced ATR percentage or or was this by, did you mean ADX? ADX or ATR in terms of strength of trend? Because this would dominate on an ADX reading. Which if you drop that into the TC2000 bundle, by the way, you're not restricted to just the symbols I look at. You can drop that ADX scan onto any subset of symbols. Just spectacular. So the trade frame that you got in this one, I would just say, since there's no resistance overhead, oh, this is average daily range as a percentage. Average daily range. It was near the bottom. Interesting screen. Well, this one would give us, if we just looked at this one on a daily, I'm going to shift over to mine because it has, I want to just show off that RL10 coral snake, that multicolored form. That thing is so powerful already that it's like I don't even need the screen real estate dedicated to the MACD anymore. I just, because I can already see the seasons right there. But we'll just leave it on there just for sure. Yeah, what's not to love? That thing just closed at an all-time high, and I mean that's just going, and gone. This is one of the reasons I like being a bottom feeder. If you look back to 2019, by the way. Those supported spring crossings, like there's one. There's another one. Man, that's just as nice as it can be. So yeah, if it makes a new high, just turbo frog it and just keep letting it go. The only thing that I would say is we might be concerned about here would be the fact that it's it just left the floodplain. What has it done the other times it's looked like that? I would just be this kind of cautious. So, I'm not sure that I would want to short that, but that Z2 excursion is one on the daily is one that you at least have to respect the fact that it's that it has these kinds of possible consequences. Yeah, but I think that one you could just buy it, couldn't you? And then build up that position with markets money. I would start it with intraday stuff. See what it looks like on intraday trading. Yeah. Z3 pinch and then a fake one go to. And then there is a harsh winter back to the 270. And then the supported spring crossing. And then it just blunders into probably an earnings announcement there in that last bit. You'd really have to be a specialist in it to get that gain. So this thing is definitely in play. And I'll just say that while we're here, this is the same thing that happened to Cisco in that after hours, that last few minutes of the day. You'll see Cisco had exactly the same experience. So that's why Cisco was on my short list for paying attention. And I just have to believe that the socioeconomic and political news from this weekend is going to have some short-term effects on volatility tomorrow. I mean, Jiminy Christmas. That's got to be the case. On the other hand, we see that the wedge being driven between the economy and the stock market on the basis of all that Fed money, which is propping up asset prices. So it's like the city of Chicago and Minneapolis and Kansas City and Detroit, the cities are on fire. Microsoft, IBM, General Motors, Apple, those companies are not on fire. So in some ways, they are immune to the civil unrest. And so if there is genuinely a disconnect or a separation or insulation between the wealth generation process of the stock market supported by the Fed and the economics of Main Street in real life businesses in the world, then there wouldn't be negative consequences to the stock market. So this is part of that hypothesis to see what's going on. So I think we're going to see a lot of things that look like this, like Cisco and eBay. But eBay is certainly a chart of interest for us. Yeah, that's. I think it's certainly tradable. I want to shift to this is one from Joe. And Joe, you did what I asked you to do, and that was increase the size of the trade frames to account for the most current price action. So there's more real estate devoted to actionable information, gives you a better lens. So Joe has taken basically the trade frame from, and called the yellow zone, this Z-1 to Z+2, and you're waiting to see a breakout from Z2 to get long, and I'm taking this as a willingness to get short at Z2, or I'm sorry, at Z-1, which I would agree with because that's the counter trend. That's where it breaks. That's the beginning of abnormal behavior. And I could see why you would want to wait to Z2 at 97 to really get long. What I might suggest is that's one where if you saw turbo, it's like it closed at 91.70. I don't know that I want to wait $7. That's an 8% move to break out of that yellow box. If it does, then I think the swing trade is clear, and off it goes all the way up the stack through Z3 to the 200-day moving average, and then up to the previous swing high of the dragon. And even that's 2-to-1. But I would also say that's one where you could look at the intraday, like on 30 minutes, if you wanted to front run some of that. So if it opens inside the yellow, like near the PSAR dot, and then starts moving up sharply, you might be able to make some bank on the intraday trade of that one. But certainly on the swing trade basis, that's a perfectly good frame. And then the breakdown places to add is very clear and straightforward. Z1, 2, and 3. And that takes you out of the box, takes you past the RL90, which would be like the health on the weekly basis. So you're in good shape. And the fact that it is in this 20-day sideways quiet channel and Z3 compression suggests you got a chance to really key into this on the next big move. So your other keys on that one, you'd be watching XLE and USO as drivers of that segment. And then Devon Energy is a nice pair to that. So Chevron is this large mega petrodollar mega cap global phenomenon. Devon Energy is a mid cap, narrowly focused U.S. solution provider, and so you get a clear distinction between Chevron and Devon in terms of the contributors to their volatility. And you'll notice that Devon is in a weaker position than Chevron, not in such a strong position to receive petrodollars and bailouts because they're just a small, actually mid cap. And so the exploration side of their business suffers because of the surplus of inventory. So you've got you're getting willing to get short here. This looks like like a low of the day from Friday. And to be honest, I'm already short Devon from the breakdown from Thursday's low on that RLXD because it was rolling over and weaker than the energy sector. And then this would be, for me, that's where I would reinforce that position. And then another position at Z-1 breaking out of the river, then 2 and 3, and then at the 90. So I really agree with this one altogether. I would consider getting long at the PSAR flip. So if it breaks through the dragon to the upside, that would have to be accompanied by strength in XLE energy to reinforce that. But I think that's I would be ready to go there. And again, just like Chevron, this has come through the Red River in the fall and has located itself just on the edge of that zero line for the MACD histogram. So that's technically a critical state and ready to break, and the downside looks easier to believe in. Pfizer showing a one way only. I don't disagree with that. Healthcare had a recent breakout. This one was not quite as strong as XLV. Your XLV actually broke out above the 30-day high. So this is one that I think, though, gives you a chance to get some company volatility as well. You've got a Z3 pinch, not quite a super pinch because the RL270 is not yet inside the Z3 lines, but for all practical purposes, this is about as Z3P as you can get. And so a breakout of Z1 and Z2 and Z3 are three places to add positions. And then the width of the box is about $1.50. So that's in pretty good shape. I'm with you on not wanting to short the healthcare and the farms. I mean, those guys are so deeply embedded in, they got Congress in their pocket that I just don't see how long term there's much downside opportunity there. I really like that trade frame. Wheat and precious metals gives us an alternative to equities. And part of the strength that we saw in equities this last week, which was a vote up from the consolidating and reorganizing of 2 weeks ago, last week was a vote up. That comes at the expense of weakness in the defensive play for precious metals. It's holding at a really important critical state right there at the Bollinger Band mean. You've mapped out a really nice ladder of prices on the downside, so immediately getting short upon any evidence of weakness on Monday. I would be prepared, though, for a hybrid frog intraday on this one, strictly because of the possibility of emotional reaction to the cities on fire. And so the precious metals as a defensive play might get some short-term play. And that's kind of how it worked back here in early April, when it also broke out of a tight trading range and gave us 3 days in a row of some gains, and then that just followed through with more momentum. But that move from like 30 to about 36, that's a 20% move that it could fire off pretty quick, and that would be like about an $8 move from 42 up to 50. So you could very easily see that blast through, and so I think I would want to be ready to trade that intraday. I think the long-term run is done, but the intraday has some possibilities. So good frame. I like your thinking on that. This is now Eugene's look on eBay, and this is daily chart still, but zoomed in, and you can see the big strong move up on Friday, and most of that strength coming in that last half hour. And so that's a willingness of guys to own that position over the weekend. We'll see how that works. I mean, if anything, the political and social events of the weekend are not going to facilitate an easy return to normal business. And so now, if you got people trying to raise some cash by selling their junk, eBay. If you're trying to take advantage of global marketplace to get better prices on the things that can be delivered, eBay. It has no resistance overhead. Clear winner for the world as far as you can see ahead. eBay, not bad. Good practice of having all of these worked out. Now, if hopefully the software that are you using TC2000 for this, Eugene? If you are, having those things entered right there in the chart, so that you can just adjust them instead of having to add them like with Snagit. You would have to add those in all the time or keep that as part of a template. But anything that will preserve your, your time value, money value of your time. Oh, trading view. Okay. Can you put those comments right on the chart so that you don't have to keep retyping them every day? I'm going to assume yes. Here's eBay now on the 30-minute charts. And you can see, again, eBay is one of those that trades really well on that 30-minute time frame. Is it a swing trade? Is it a day trade? It's both. And you can see why on the 30-minute, for the entire chart, you were never sad if you were looking at 30 minutes and then did supported spring crossings, because you get one here on the 22nd, you get another one here on at 1300 on the 27th, and there's a big multi-day payoff, including a favorable gap. You get an RLXD, and you could even have been short that, I suppose. And then on Friday, in just a standard way, while posturing for the weekend, you get an entry around 44.41, and you get paid in a major way just that day. You don't even actually have to hold that over the weekend. Or you could do the same thing we did with the Walmart case study earlier this week, in which we decided how much of the intraday move to keep in order to be postured for a favorable gap. Now, I don't know what the gap's going to be yet, and you wouldn't know that on Friday, because you got to see what the Sunday futures are like. But you got to commit to it 2 days before the news cycle has run its course. And if you knew the cities were going to be on flame on Friday, would you have, wanted to hold that position, or would you have taken that possibility into account? So it's always tricky. That's why, for me, the position size is anywhere from 1/5 to 1/10 of the size of the intraday position, simply because of the liquidity and the react to contact nature of intraday trading. But good trade frame there. I like all of that. I really think getting above 45, as long as it's above 45, but as long as it can hold above 45, that was the previous PSAR reversal. So as long as that rascal can stay above 45, I think it's good to go. Which means to me that if it were to open where it closed at 45.40-ish, you got about a 40-cent buffer before you really want to preserve some capital. I like the trade thoughts you have here about how to build out a multiple positions over a multi-day swing. Good stuff. This is Ken Hum's self-assessment on Alcoa. I just want to point out to you again the if you find the size of that minimum manageable risk box, and it opens around 980, and your entries are around 10.25, that's 45 cents, and yet the size of the moves on the follow through are not quite that large. Those are about 20 to 30 cents. So it's my opinion there's a possibility getting in earlier on this one. Now that you know what that looks like, you can be prepared for that kind of sharp move. I like your commentary inside here, and then I want you to just notice how useful the darn Z, when it gets beyond Z3, all bets are off. It's crazy out there. You are well beyond normal rules. So that, to me, maybe just cashing it just take the gift at Z3. But I like the fact that you preserved. I like you were able to reset and try this. That's not a bad move right there. And then this is a fantastic exit. This is one where I think you could consider. I don't know. I don't know that I get short there because the VWAP is so close. But I like taking the shot, and I love the exit as a PSAR exit, a routine exit. So a scratch there. That's a good practice on a no lose plus dinner for two. I think this could have been earlier, and only because you're at the VWAP already, and you've got a PSAR flip, and this is like a fall supported crossing. You had a powerful summer. Maybe this is all fall. A double bottom in the RL10, and then I think this could be stop and reverse here with that PSAR, and then if you're quicker on the fail, then this becomes a scratch trade instead of a fractional loss, and then if you're exiting in here at the P1 or inside the PSAR flip, then where you exited on this trade actually is probably you'd have recovered and had your entry here when it crossed the Bollinger Band mean, which I would recommend you turn that as red so you can it really stands out as the middle of the river for you. Then you could be short here with the second position, and now this one really makes bank. I love that exit. Why wait for it to come all the way back to the PSAR, especially if you had two positions in? That would be amazing. And then correct identification of the potential collapsing dragon. Work intervene, but good eyesight on that. So I think you've done a really nice job documenting in here. And then you have a nice handful of things to consider for improvements. Finally, the Merck daily, and this is one that I think, not unlike eBay, which was free and clear. This one has to contend with the previous price excursions, which you've identified up in here at the this looks like the PSAR flip and the RL10 flip right in here, and it's also a Z2. This one is kind of strictly the looks like a swing high. It comes in at about Z2.5 and then Z3. So a nice structured price ladder of places where you could invoke the 2-hour battle drill using the 1-day range as the yellow zone. I think I think you're saying that may be the short. Let's see, would it fail? Would I stop and reverse? Yeah, you wouldn't stop and reverse on a failed long. I would agree with that. I would wait for the PSAR to break to get that as a swing, and then you'd have sort of a no-brainer trade on that one, and that would have invalidated the previous 20 days if it breaks through that PSAR. And the fact that it is fall, winter, fall, then if that thing breaks through the PSAR, you're definitely going to see winter conditions, and then I think that's where you could be short. So just consider that from your trade frame. So pretty good work all across the board. I think that's everything I want to cover. You guys have done a nice job on all these. Look at Microsoft. Just some things that are on my mind. We've looked at Cisco and United Health already. Microsoft, just kind of marking time. I think they're well postured. There have been a couple attempts to reverse it. It held each time, and if it breaks out above that PSAR, off it goes. I really think eBay makes a lot of sense. I sort of like that one. That looks good to me. You wonder if Tesla is going to have any payoff from the successful test. I mean, you got to love Elon Musk as the P.T. Barnum of our times. If you listen to some of the commentary out there, you would think this is a religious experience that for the first time ever, humans have left the planet Earth in a rocket and been delivered. Oh, no. 60 years ago, we landed guys on the moon. Well, 1969, so that's 51 years ago. And other nations and us have been sending astronauts to and from Earth safely for decades. And yet he's able to turn that into near quasi-religious experience. So we'll see how that shapes out as, in proximity to SpaceX, where my brother-in-law is a rocket scientist and having just a great weekend. Feel so happy for him. Virgin Galactic, has sort of recovered pretty nicely. I wonder if there's any space race recovery for them. I don't know. I'm just going to keep trading them shorter term, especially now that they seem to be coming into like a sideways quiet channel and a narrowing of the RLs, and they're around 17. I sort of like that one as a breakout speculator. I think I kind of like this, like right there. I think that's ready to go in either direction. Visual box trading. EPP, Asia less Japan. has been vulnerable to the geopolitical tensions over there, and harder to day trade that one because of the very narrow ranges. But on a swing trade, I think I would be ready to be short this right here, because let's suppose that the rest of the world is really worried about the U.S., and you see a lot of global media headlines really concerned about that. You see other nations in the world really concerned about geopolitical implications, like India, Australia, and Japan just signed a agreement to share logistics for military operations as sort of a regional triumvirate of defense against the growing Chinese threat. So there's some people taking that stuff pretty darn seriously. Well, if that gets worse and the U.S. is on fire, what's that do to overall global markets? Well, I think my response is, well, Asia less Japan would be an area that could be vulnerable. So I'm going to be stalking that one, not trading it yet, but stalking it. And compare that to the shape of Japan, which is just much, much better. Now, Friday, I took the exit in Japan because it had gotten to a Z3 excursion. Like when Japan closed on Thursday, it had been that high and then closed here. And then when it gapped down on Friday, I just said enough is enough. And so I took that one and cashed it. But it recovered pretty nicely. So I think I'm also ready to look at Japan as not the U.S. and ready to play that in either direction. And I think it's up. I think they got it figured out. I think I'm ready to get long on that instantly. We looked at Wheaton. Walmart is still the interesting play, the anomaly inside the Dow. Come on, draw for me here. Looks like Japan may be the last one. So that's everything I want to cover tonight, guys. I'll get this processed and posted for you. Hang in there. Starting next week, as I begin to concentrate on the questions that the advanced hybrid guys are sending me, I'll be using this week to kind of really build out their answers. And so the strategy podcast for June, I think, is going to take on a much more current operations focus and kind of strictly looking at the closure reports. And I'll try to share the lessons learned to come out of the videos for the advanced hybrid guys. But the strategy podcast is going to take on more of a sharper operational focus and less of the educational sideline. So take good care, and we will see you ready to work tomorrow. Pray for peace, work for peace, and work on your part of it. And remember what the nature of the world and your view of what that is shapes your expectations of it. So let your conscience be your guide. Keep your wrist measured and your powder dry. Take good care.